I think women need to be brave and step up and step into that space, not just of agriculture, but absolutely nature and land management and environmental conservation. In all of the practices and all the farming we're doing, we're trying to establish that deep connection to country, to the animals upon it, with each other, with our community, the people that we feed. I think those are the connections that we need to reestablish to actually change the status quo.
This podcast series, Queensland Women, Inspiring Stories from Environmental Champions, gives voice to the vital environment support and ecological sustainability work undertaken by inspiring women practitioners, advocates and thought leaders in this state. We hope that it offers our audience, and particularly women listeners, energising ideas and encouraging role models which can help motivate them as they develop their own contributions toward building a genuinely sustainable future in this place. To be clear, that would be a future based upon much improved levels of human and other species health and well-being, much improved levels of social fairness, and an authentic, sustainable economic prosperity which leaves no one behind. The series was produced for Hope Incorporated Australia in Toowoomba, Queensland, on and adjacent to the traditional lands of the Jarawar, Gayabal, Yugara and Waka Waka peoples of the surrounding region. Hope pays respect to the past, present and emerging leaders of all First Nation Australians in this country and celebrates the unique contributions their cultures make to this place. Those contributions include Indigenous spiritual respect and care for country, the sovereignty of which was never ceded. We acclaim Indigenous stewardship of the nature of Australia, undertaken over many, many thousands of years, and the model that stewardship provides us now in this place as we survey and attempt to repair some of the environmental damage created by the often misguided development approaches of only the last 200 years or so. Hello and welcome. My name is Andrew Nicholson and I am the producer of the podcast series. The practice of regenerative agriculture, as described by one of its best-known Australian advocates, farmer Charles Massey, is a system of farming which doesn't push the land beyond what it is naturally capable of sustaining without chemical inputs. It's a form of farming that values a complex and healthy soil and is underpinned by the principle that healthy landscapes lead to healthy food and therefore healthy people and a healthy planet. From an environmental protection and enhancement perspective, regenerative agriculture is recognised as being capable of increasing ground cover, soil carbon and diversity of soil biology, improving soil water retention capacity and encouraging beneficial plants and animals that provide natural ecosystem services such as pollination and insect or vermin control. Regenerative as opposed to industrial scale agriculture is also reported as having considerably lower toxic chemical environmental impact through its much reduced inputs of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers, with the additional benefit to the farmer of reducing the expense of purchase and application of those products. My guest in this podcast episode, Juanita Breen, has, along with her husband and children, developed extensive experience of this environmentally supportive form of farming. She describes the Breen farm as a regenerative, multi-species family business which provides food for a wide variety of clients and customers in the region through its community-supported agriculture program. The diverse operations of the farm are rooted in the values of 4 goods, defined as good for the animal, good for the land, good for the farmer, and good for you, that is, the consumer. Juanita says that these 4 good principles and a focus on a circular economy of operation are key to this small 700-acre farm's viability and success. In this episode, Juanita describes her journey toward regenerative agriculture expertise and how her family helped bring this successful example of a more genuinely sustainable and future-focused form of farming to the Southeast Queensland region. So after that very long and extensive introduction, welcome, Juanita. It's great to talk with you today.
Thanks, Andrew. It's really wonderful to be here.
Let's start the conversation by asking you to give us a bit of brief personal background history on your environmental support interests, specifically around this first question. Do you remember how your passion for the environment started?
Well, I actually grew up on a wholesale nursery, so my family was always in horticulture, which is a different form of farming, and so there was always a connection to plants and nature and living things. But I think this really evolved once we purchased our own property at Colleyville and moved onto that farm there in the Scenic Rim region, replacing animals with plants.
And staying with earlier times, when talking about early formative experiences in a career, profession, or calling, people often refer to other people who influenced them. So my next question logically is there anyone in particular you remember who inspired or mentored you in your work?
Obviously, two significant men in my life, probably my husband, Randall. So he's incredibly passionate about regenerative agriculture and agroecology. And he really, I suppose, drove this journey into regenerative agriculture. And obviously my father too, he, growing up with him as a horticulturalist and plants and nursery, absolutely. He definitely, for all us kids, he definitely embedded a passion for nature and appreciation. Along with those, obviously on a personal level, there's names like Charles Massey and Bruce Pascoe. These guys are the forebearers of Regen Ag. Their books, their works around this subject is incredibly inspiring, and they're wonderful storytellers in this space. And I'd encourage everyone to get their books and read them if they haven't already.
And, on that score, I've heard, both those authors, thought leaders, for want of a better term, mentioned by other guests. So, and we'll definitely put links to those, the works of those authors, into the show notes that go along with the podcast episode. So, listeners can hopefully follow up on that stuff. So, look, very interesting to hear those direct personal influences, but also, as you know, in later life, some of that more textual based stuff coming into your head. But moving now on to some of your direct experiences and activities, how you've actually, I suppose, applied some of this learning and knowledge as you went along. How did you get involved with the ideas of environmental conservation to begin with? When did you first start?
Well, we're actually first generation farmers. So we've been farming on the land we're on now for 9 years. And then prior to that, at our first farm in Colleyville, we were there for another 4. So we're very new farmers. We recognise that. But our background is in community development and social science. And so for us, when we looked at stepping into that farming world and agricultural world, I think there wasn't any other option for us rather than regenerative agriculture or agroecology. It was a marriage of value sets, really. And I think, that responsibility towards the environment and conserving and respecting nature and ecosystems, just like our communities, it really resonated.
As always, throughout this series, I'm a sort of bigger picture person. I'm a lay person from the point of view of agriculture. I know of some of these fantastic initiatives, regenerative agriculture, holistic management coming in, but I'm always trying to, I suppose, make links, both for my own making sense purposes, but also perhaps, for a more lay, audience that might be listening to some of this stuff outside of agriculture. Some of these, ideas of regeneration, they seem to be, fit very well with a bigger picture application of environmental stewardship more generally, a respectful dealing with nature and the natural world. Also concepts like well-being economics, the idea of actually having an economy that
Absolutely.
links to both social and environmental concerns in a much more integrated way, and planetary boundaries. The absolute ecological limits to what we do versus this idea that we can just have untrammeled economic growth. Someone once said, wasn't it? The only person who believes in unending growth on a fixed planet is either a mad person or an economist. That was the standard sort of critique. but anyway, thanks for that sort of overview of your early formative background, how you've got to be here in a sense. Now, thinking more broadly about your work and your professional life experience, people sometimes, and we've touched upon this, already in the sense of early influences, but people also sometimes talk about having a light bulb or aha moment in terms of what they're doing. So the question here is, was there a specific moment in time when you first realized what beneficial impact your work was having in protecting or restoring the environment?
A light bulb moment. I don't know if there was a single light bulb moment. I think it's a series of light bulbs for us. I think when you can see the restoration happening in your environment physically, and when you can feel it, like in terms of some tangible measures, increasing our soil organic matter. Doubling it, even though we've gone through the worst drought in history. Some of those measures, seeing the native fauna return to the environment. And we recently had a farm tour, and one of our attendees, one of our long-term customers, he'd come to one of our very first farm tours on the farm, 6 years ago. And he recently attended another one. And he said what really struck him was the bird life and that return of bird life to the environment on the farm. That was really exciting to hear. And so it's these ever constant realizations. So I think, not one light bulb moment, but many.
Yeah, well, it's great, and again, I'm struck. I've already interviewed another guest in this sort of space, holistic management, regenerative agriculture space, and I'm struck, at a number of ways about the fact that you're getting on with doing some of this truly integrated, triple bottom line, environment, society, economy stuff, in a sense, in a quiet way behind the scenes, because these ideas have been around for a long time. In environmental science, even the Earth system science level concepts of social and ecological systems, the close interconnection, planetary boundaries have been around for 10 to 15 years now. But it's one thing to have these concepts, in the scientific literature. It's another thing to see them being applied in practical, on the ground, literally on the ground terms. It's fantastic. It's been really inspiring to hear this, that the agriculture sector in terms of regenerative stuff is getting on with the job. And I just think, some of that other stuff, a truly sustainable, future, we know has to focus on those intimate connections between the human community and the physical environment. This idea that we're separate from nature and that we can just keep on doing our old, extractive and destructive stuff, has got to come to, it has come to the end of its working life. But, tell that to some sectors of society. But anyway, the fact that you are modeling the alternatives, the very productive and ecologically sound alternatives is fantastic. So look, let's just now move on a little bit as we go through this really interesting interview. Let's consider some specific accomplishments. We've been talking about on the ground stuff that is actually demonstrating the ability of these ideas to work in practice in the agriculture setting. So are there any environmental achievements you are particularly satisfied with or proud of, and why?
I think one area that we're hugely proud of is our work with yield stream feed, we call it, or waste stream feed. So each week we divert 5 tonnes of what would be considered waste, food waste in the Brisbane region, and we bring that back to the farm and we utilise that either as compost or as to feed our animals. And so we're diverting that from landfill. And that's something to be hugely proud of. I think in terms of touching that space, it's like a drop in the ocean. When we first started to dip our toe into that water of waste that's generated through our food system and manufacturing, it was unbelievable. We were blown away with how much gets wasted on a weekly or daily basis. And so that's something really we're really proud to be part of, diverting that from landfill each week. I think too, we've worked really hard at creating community connections, and we have an incredible community around us. And each week we feed over 100 families with the food that we produce on our farm, working with nature. So they're probably really 2 things that I think as a farm we're incredibly proud of.
I think again, you just operationalized in the agricultural sort of format, that idea. We mentioned that briefly at the beginning, but the circular economy. And again, it is a sort of, in a sense, taking the lesson from nature, trying to mimic nature. In effect, there is no waste in nature, but we have these end of pipe linear take, make, waste models in Western development up to now, which has created all the problems. You're trying to bend the pipe, in effect. We're all trying to bend the pipe, might be one way of saying, to make it into a circular. Yeah. And you're doing that with the use of waste to actually create, very nutritious food. I mean, you can't really go past that, can you? It's fantastic.
Yeah. I'd love to see every council region put an employee on that manages waste, not in the sense of the conventional normal sense that we're doing it now, but in that sense of connecting farmers or producers with the waste options and diverting that. Every council in Australia should have an employee who works on that and manages that. Really, I'd love to see that outcome.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully the ripple effects of this discussion, who knows, there might be someone, listening, behind the scenes. Like, have you heard this? You need to listen to this.
Yeah.
I just think also very quickly that direct connection also to quality of food, in a overpopulated world or a very populous world, depending on your viewpoint, the ability to feed the world, but to feed it with good quality food. Nutrient dense food, all of that benefit of compost, the bacterial organisms in the compost, etc., actually leading to soil improvement, which leads to the improvement of the actual plants that grow there for the actual food that people eat. So that direct connection to human health as well, which again, that connection is starting to come in, or has been coming in at the scientific level. Planetary health, keep the ecology of the planet healthy. You'll also keep the human health, going as well. There's a direct connection to.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So that idea of holism, of interconnection, it runs through your talk. It's run through the talks of other guests as well. Everything is connected to everything else. If we can actually operationalize that and make it a reality, we're going to massively benefit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So look, Juanita, as we now move through the story of your, regenerative agricultural work and contributions, it can't have all been plain sailing, as they say, or, a bed of roses, if you're trying to think of an agricultural thing. Inevitably, there must have been a few or more than a few obstacles for you to overcome along the way. And I think people, whenever they look at innovators, entrepreneurs, people who are trying to, bring in new ideas, new ways of doing things, I think people are interested in how they overcame the challenges. What's the motivation behind that? How do they keep going with it, et cetera, et cetera. So the question specifically here would be, what have been some of the challenges you faced in your regen agriculture journey, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, wow. So I think if we looked at our journey over the last 9 years, specifically on this farm we're on now, we have experienced the worst drought on record, in recorded history. We've had fire, not on our property, but up over Cunningham's Gap. We've had floods, major flooding. We had a major mouse plague. We had an introduced disease. And obviously, as everyone has experienced, the pandemic. So, I think these are events, and we hear them being described as once in 100-year events. And I think the language around that needs to change, because if we can be here for 9 years and experience all of those in our very short time of farming, something is very wrong with the system. I think as we increase and continue to increase our impact on the world and, our natural environment, these events will just become more and more common, unfortunately. I think the only way we can overcome them is to be more resilient and to work in partnership with our landscape, which is obviously what we are aiming to do in our farming operation. I think we've really got to stop and listen and try and observe what it's trying to tell us. We've got to be more responsible how we manage it, and I think the most important thing is we need to advocate and we need to share the story of what's happening, and also too what we're trying to achieve, what the answer is, and how we can turn this around and change it for the good.
I love that last bit, particularly, the visioning aspect of this. It might seem obvious to some people, but the thing is, if you can't imagine an alternative future, how can you work towards it? But that, again, seems to have escaped some of the great and the good, that run the planet at one level. But I think that, again, that idea of visioning, good alternatives to the destructive practice that we're engaged in at the moment too often is coming in. And it clearly seems to be front and center in regen agriculture, holistic management. That seems to be some of the principles, have a vision, have the values that back that vision up. That's going to drive, that you're going to have your goals, but that's going to drive effective action towards achieving those goals that's in line with the vision and the values. Again, that stuff's been around for a long time, alignment of values and vision. But again, to see it being operated is so fantastically inspiring. And the other thing you mentioned there, which is almost like a golden ticket word at the moment, resilience. It's a word like sustainability that gets bandied around a lot, as to everyone's got a definition. But it is an extremely, along with holism, is an extremely important concept when it's applied seriously. In whether it's in agriculture or general sustainability thinking, resilience being thought of as the ability to maintain a steady course or state in the face of experiencing shocks or disturbance. So that's a very useful idea. It's closely linked with notions of the ability to adapt, to change successfully, or to maintain a steady course in the face of disturbing forces. And as you've just implied, as far as the environment's concerned, there's plenty of those knocking about. Coming back to the...
Absolutely. And,
yeah, go on. Go for it.
And I think environment is never static. Nature is never static anyway. And so we have to be resilient in terms of that adaptability. That's key. If we want to work with nature and we want to work with environment, it's actually, it has to happen. Sorry.
No. Hey, we're not saying sorry in this podcast. This is all about women's voices. I'm going to edit this. I'll be editing this down. But seriously, no, please do interrupt me, because I'll just waffle on. But coming back to the specific discussion, I mean, that idea of resilience is so useful as well, because it can be used for, general environmental matters, but it also comes down to the personal. So coming back to your personal story, of moving through this regen agriculture experience, I think people and audiences are often interested in what makes other people tick in terms of the driving force and motivation that motivates them to keep on doing what they do. A form of resilience, in effect, because people manage to keep on doing this in spite of setbacks or whatever. So how do they do that? What do they manage? How do they manage that? So a question here about personal motivation and staying on course to achieve things in one's work or career. Let's take that example, because that's what we're really talking about with yourself, despite challenges and difficulties. So the specific question is, in your particular case, Juanita, how do you feel your work has influenced your well-being, motivation, and determination to keep doing what you do?
Well, agriculture, and I think even more specifically, regenerative agriculture is a really challenging industry. It's not an easy road to take. I think despite that, the act of working in the natural environment and with the soil, with the animals, and in your landscape, it actually gives you a very deep satisfaction. And I think about our First Nations people and Indigenous people and their deep connection to country. And I think that really resonates. There's a deep satisfaction in working in partnership with your environment. And that definitely is a huge motivator, despite the, numerous challenges that we've experienced in our short farming career. I think my partner and I both are still so passionate and still motivated to keep pushing and to keep working with our landscape and, demonstrating an alternative option to what's currently out there, to the conventional. Because ultimately, if we want to see improvement in our landscape, in nature, in our environment, we have to uptake this form of farming. So, for me, that's probably,
But there's a number of ideas you've raised there, and I'm just going to, riff off one or two of them. But I just, as you introduced that mention of Indigenous, First Nations experiences, I just think that it's often cited, and increasingly cited perhaps, that that love of place that is so fundamental to Indigenous worldviews, that idea of being that nature and the human self themselves there is no distinction. They are one and the same thing. And although in the Western world, perhaps at times we might have approached that sort of almost mystical, spiritual connection, in the past, it certainly seems to be coming back stronger now. People, you see this in all sorts of ways, even from just what might be considered a mundane interest of people in nature documentaries. People like to see nature. I mean, that whole biophilia sort of concept idea that perhaps we were born with an innate gene that connects us to the natural world, if only we could remember it, but I can only imagine how joyous it must be, in effect, to be able to live, albeit a very difficult life, very demanding, hard work, but you are almost living that more Indigenous connection to place. You're experiencing that love of place. You're enhancing that place. You've got that respectful, almost, I don't know if it's love, but a respectful connection and relationship to place. So I can understand, perhaps only in an armchair setting, what that might feel like.
Yeah, I think you're right that it definitely is a love, and I definitely think it's a deep, intimate connection. And I know my partner bangs on about it all the time, but he says that, we really, in all of the practices and all the farming we're doing, we're trying to establish that deep connection to country, to the animals upon it, with each other, with our community, the people that we feed. I think those are the connections that we need to reestablish to actually change the status quo.
And again, perhaps just riffing off that, and without spending too much time, because we're going off script here in one sense, but, that idea in a vicious, backstabbing, hard-nosed world, we need more love. I'm going to start playing a Beatles track in the background here now, but, seriously, we do need emotion and love. And this may be a stereotypical view, but it's often said that women possess more, not entirely, they haven't got a monopoly on it, but they possess more of that ability to see that need and bring it to the fore. So I'm hoping that is one of the things that does come out of this podcast series, because I am talking to women specifically. And I just think that whole thing, that emotional connection to country, if you don't have an affection and love for something, how will you respect it? I mean, it seems to be a fairly self-evident thing at one level, but we seem to have missed the actual nose in front of our face, in a sense, with regards to the way we do things in the world.
Definitely.
All right. Well, after these sort of semi-philosophical ramblings here, Juanita, let's now move toward the end of this really great interview. Let's switch focus to the present moment in 2023 and the future beyond. So just this question now, are you working on any current exciting projects?
Yeah, we're actually in the process of building an on-farm boning and packing room, which we call our Four Goods Meat House, linking back to the Four Goods that you read at the start of the interview, introduced. And so that's a huge project that's been going on for the last 2 years. Incredibly exciting that we're almost at the finish line, but we're essentially trying to integrate that system into our farming, talking about circular models, and also to creating greater viability, not just for us in our farm, but also a lot of the farmers in the local region who are wanting to access that service at a not-for-profit rate. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, look, and again, I think that whole what used to be termed extension, was it? I mean, but education, passing on ideas within the agriculture sector, whatever it is termed now, but passing on the message in a systematic way, education of the community. Having talked to a first guest in this series who is involved with holistic management, it's fantastically exciting to hear how much of that is now coming on stream, how much of that educative and training process, and you clearly are going to add to that, which will be absolutely amazing.
Yeah. So, there'll be a workshop that sits alongside that, a workshop space that sits alongside that. So, yeah, education is so integral to what we're doing too. It's not just about creating viability for farm, but it's about engaging our consumers and our community and educating them on not just the farming systems, but that whole holistic view of agriculture, nature and environment and what we eat.
It's going to be so valuable. And given you'll be tapping into that fantastic repository of skills and experience, 9 years. So look, bring it on. It's going to be great. And, perhaps somewhere down the track, you're going to be able to flag that up. It's probably too early to flag it up in this podcast series, in terms of that particular aspect of your business. But no doubt there will be other options to get that, out there to a wider audience. So finally, Juanita, a last question for you. This is on the ability to hand on the benefits of the regen agriculture experience you've gained to the audience, who might be inspired to take some immediate next steps toward building a genuine, ecologically sustainable future in this place. You'll eventually have that training space, that fantastic initiative you just mentioned, to achieve those objectives, which will be brilliant. But before that happens, do you have a brief take-home message that helps summarize the ideas of regenerative agriculture you've been talking about today? And on the motivation front, do you have any advice specifically for women wanting to step up into regenerative agriculture, landscape and wildlife protection, or other environment support roles? Anything you might have to say about that?
Yeah, I obviously think women are going to be integral in that. And I think you hit it on the head before. I think there's an innate, they don't own love, but they have an innate nurturing spirit. And I think, it's been such a male dominated industry for so long. So I think women need to be brave and step up and step into that space, not just of agriculture, but absolutely nature and land management and environmental conservation. If I wanted to leave them with one last message of encouragement, I think, and I'm going to steal this from my partner because I think it's great, but one of his mottos is to be a patient, attentive observer and look in the landscape and create a intimate connection with it, the what's beneath the soil, what's above the soil, and actually just re-engage and listen to what it's trying to tell us. I think it doesn't matter what kind of environmental engagement you have, whether it's in conservation, agriculture, but that patient, attentive observer and reconnecting is absolutely, that's what I can recommend.
Working with nature, relating respectfully and positively to nature. What a brilliant and optimistic message and rallying call to end this wonderful interview. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you today. I'm sure you've given our audience some great ideas which can help inform their own thinking about possible next steps toward building a genuine, ecologically sustainable future in this place. And hopefully, they'll start their own conversations on regenerative agriculture, for instance, or other environmental topics with their friends, colleagues within employing organizations or in their professional associations. But as with each of our guests in this series, we also hope that your particular inspiring story of the work you've done will ripple out far and wide and create influence everywhere. But for now, on behalf of my podcast support organization, Householders Options to Protect the Environment, it just remains for me to thank you very warmly for our conversation today.
Thanks, Andrew. It's been really wonderful.
You've been listening to a podcast episode in the series Queensland Women, Inspiring Stories from Environmental Champions. The series was produced for Householders Options to Protect the Environment Incorporated as part of the Queensland Women's Week 2023 event, and it aligns with the objectives of the Queensland Women's Strategy 2022 to 2027. Hope thanks the Queensland Department of Justice and Attorney General's Office for Women and Violence Prevention for the generous funding support which made this podcast project possible. Please consult the episode text notes for possible follow-up material on topics discussed and any relevant contact details should you wish to respond to anything you've heard. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider promoting it across your networks and giving it a positive rating in your preferred podcast app. My name is Andrew Nicholson, producer of the series, and thank you for listening.